Hilda, Chapter 10. Grief. The pen lay awkwardly in my hand, heavier than it should be, as if it knew I was struggling to find the words. The room was silent, save for the dull hum of the lamp, flickering, faintly stuttering. It needed changing, but I couldn't be bothered. I couldn't afford it either. The small apartment wasn't cold, but there was a hollowness, a bite to the air that reminded me of all the things I'd let sleep, little things that I no longer had the energy to care about. Outside, I could hear the shouts of kids playing soccer, their laughter echoing up from the street, bouncing off the stone walls of this quiet place. The words were bright, unfamiliar, some mix of French and German that felt foreign to me, even after months here. Strange to be surrounded by life and youth, their voices so oblivious to the weight of anything beyond the game. But it was distant, weighted, like they were part of another world, another life. It didn't matter, the lamp, the soccer game, the restless city outside. What mattered was this pen, this blank page. I had to write. I wanted to write, but could I? Dear Mr. Bauer, I wrote, the letters tilting unsteadily across the top of the page. I stared at it for a moment. Now, I tried, the word hanging on the page before I scrapped it away. It felt too abrupt, like I was jumping to something too raw, too soon. I've reached, I wrote, then stopped. Reached where? What did I mean? I rubbed the page until the ink smeared, my hand aching, eyes narrowing at the tangled mess of failed beginnings. The frustration bubbled up, sour and unrelenting, as I forced myself to keep going. It's Hilda. But that felt wrong too, didn't it? How could I say it's Hilda? It had to be her writing this at the very first place, not me. I gritted my teeth and tore the page out, crumbling it, letting it fall beside the others scattered across the floor. And then I pressed my head into my hands, the weight of it all pressing down so hard I thought it might shatter me right there. I wanted to write to Bruno, to tell him something, anything that could make sense of everything I felt, but the words I needed were beyond me, just out of reach, buried under layers of guilt and loss and memories too heavy to carry. What was I supposed to say? That I was alive? That I'd made it to Switzerland, where it was safe, where I could hear children playing outside as if nothing in the world had ever gone wrong? How could I explain what it felt like to be here, knowing that she was gone, that she would never know this place, this fragile beast that felt as empty as the room around me? I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling the pressure build, a silence stretching out that no words could fill. The bell on the door chimed, snapping me out of my tangled thoughts. I wiped a hand over my face, pushing back the heaviness, and went to the door. Cha stood there, her expression softened in that familiar, understated way. "Hey," she greeted, stepping inside with a curveball, quiet presence, her eyes glancing around as if measuring the atmosphere in our space. "Hey," I replied, closing the door behind her. She handed me a small white pill, worn and crumpled from being carried. This was the only painkiller available, she explained. I nodded, swallowing down a sigh. Well, better than nothing. Leaving her by the door, I went to the kitchen, filling a glass with water. The tap hissed and spluttered, then steadied, the stream cold water sharp. I stood there for a moment, staring at the clear water in the glass, watching the way it caught the light. There was an aching quiet in the air, the kind of quiet that stretched in awkward pauses, that made each movement feel fragile. Behind me, I heard Joss shift slightly, the soft rustle of her jacket as she made her way to the worn-out chair by the window. "Do you know Louise?" she asked, her voice drifting across the room. I looked over my shoulder. "Who's that?" She sat down, folding her arms, leaning back. "That guy from work," she explained, her fingers tapping lightly on the arm of the chair. "The one who sits with me all the time." I took a slow sip of water, letting her words settle. What about him?" Her gaze drifted, thoughtful. "He was talking about his friend today. The friend sent a letter to her parents in Berlin, and now they've arrested them, the parents." Her voice was level, steady, but I could feel the ripple of something sharp beneath the calm surface. I set the glass down, feeling a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water. "Do they really read the letters before delivery?" John nodded, her eyes finding mine across the small distance between us. "They do, every single one, especially if it's crossing borders. I just wanted to warn you, do not contact anyone close to you, not until things change." I nodded, almost instinctively, knowing she could see me from where she sat. There was a slow sinking feeling settling into my bones. Every little connection, every thread that tied me to home felt as though it was slipping away. I swallowed the pill with a gulp of water, feeling its bitterness linger on my tongue, and then headed straight for my pillow. I lay down, pressing my cheek into the coolness of the pillow, letting my body sink into the thin mattress. I shut my eyes, hoping for once that sleep would come easily, that it would fold me into silence. From someone nearby, I heard a voice, soft and steady. "You should do something about the headache, you know." I opened my eyes just slightly, and there she was, sitting against the wall across from me, her gaze tracing over me with a quiet concern. The faint light from the lamp caught in her eyes, and the way she looked at me, unblinking, watchful, made me feel both comforted and exposed. "It's nothing special," I mumbled, feeling the words fade down my tongue. "It's just the nightmares." She leaned forward, her face softening. "Hilda, I'm worried about you." Her voice was gentle, insistent, slipping into the stillness of the room. "You barely eat, you only go out for work, and then come back to this?" She gestured vaguely around, as if the walls and the dim light and the silent space were swallowing me whole. There was a pause, a deep breath hanging between us, and then I replied, my voice low, "I just want to sleep." I felt my words settle, heavy and resigned, like they were the only answer I had. I turned on my side, pulling the blanket tight around me, a shield of fabric to hide my face, to close off any hint of vulnerability she might find. My heart ached with that strange mix of gratitude and guilt, the warmth of her worry and the coldness of my own walls pushing her away. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the weight of exhaustion, letting the words slip away. The last thing I sensed was her presence there, a quiet shadow in the room, holding a concern in the space my silence left. And finally, sleep took me, pulling me down into that vast, restless dark. The kitchen buzzed with activity, an orchestra of clanging pots and sizzling ingredients that filled the air with a chaotic rhythm. I stood at the stainless steel countertop, enveloped by the warmth of the hotel kitchen in Switzerland. That was my life for a straight 4 months. Bright overhead lights cast stark shadows across the room, illuminating the hustle around me. The scent of roasted garlic and fresh herbs mingled with something sweet that clawed at my insides, evoking memories I fought to suppress. Sunlight streamed through the high windows, but the brightness felt almost mocking, a cruel contrast to the darkness that clung to my heart. My colleagues moved like dancers, each absorbed in their own creations, their faces focused and serene. I envied them. An elderly chef carefully stirred a delicate sauce at the far end, while another worker chopped vegetables with a precision that spoke of years spent mastering the craft. As I measured flour for a pastry duff, the familiar scent of caraway seeds wafted through the air, wrapping around me like an unwanted throat. My heart sank, and I was suddenly back in that damp basement, hidden away from the world, where I could smell the cooking wafting up through the floorboards. She had kept me safe there, her gentle presence a beacon of hope amidst the darkness that threatened to consume us. The aroma of her meals that had filled the air with warmth, even as fear loomed just outside. I squeezed my eyes shut, the memories crashing over me like a tidal wave. I could see her now, a silhouette against the dim light, bustling about her kitchen while I huddled below, scared yet comforted by her presence. She had taken such care to shield me from the horrors above, her laughter echoing softly through the floor, a reminder that there was still joy in the world. But those moments now felt like ghosts, hunting me with their impossibility. Then the memory shifted, darkened. I could see her face as I held her, blood staining my hands as the life drained from her. The weight of her body had pressed against me, her warmth fading into the cold reality of loss. I had tried to save her, to pull her back from the edge, but all I could do was watch, powerless as she slipped away. The kitchen around me blurred, and I gripped the counter tightly, the taste of bile rising in my throat. In my haste, I knocked over a spice jar, and it shattered on the floor, this sound like shattering glass in my heart. "Sorry," I called out, my voice shaky. The elderly chef looked over, his expression softening as he waved off my apology, but his kindness felt like a salt in a wound, deepening the ache within me. I forced a smile, but it felt brittle, a fragile mask over the storm brewing inside. The memory surged again, relentless, her gentle laughter, the way she hummed to herself as she cooked, the small moments of endurance that had seemed so safe. Each scent in the kitchen pulled me back, a reminder of warmth I had lost. I felt dizzy, the air thick with nostalgia and grief. I staggered back, the kitchen spinning around me, and the cacophony of voices became a muddled noise that drowned out my thoughts. I needed to escape, to breathe. I rushed to the small bathroom at the back of the kitchen, heart racing as I pushed through the door. Once inside, I barely made it to the sink before the contents of my stomach surged up, spilling forth in a violent rush. The bitter taste of bile burned my throat as I heaved, each rush pulling me deeper into the darkness of my memories. The images of her faded smile, the warmth of her hand, and the laughter that had once filled the basement clawed at my insides, demanding to be released. The evening light slipped through the window, casting a warm glow over my small room as I sat at the makeshift table, brush in hand, trying to capture a fleeting moment on canvas. The smell of oil and fresh paint filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of candle wax. I painted her. I focused on the curves of her form, the way her hair fell gracefully around her shoulders. I remembered how she often tucked a strand behind her ear, a simple gesture that spoke volumes. Her lips full and inviting. I could almost hear her voice, soft yet assertive, guiding me through the darkness that had engulfed my world. Lost in the act of creation, I didn't notice when Shaw entered the room until I heard her voice, breaking the silence that wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. "Where did you buy this?" she asked, gesturing to the candle flickering next to my painting. "It's beautiful." I looked up, momentarily startled by her presence. "There's a new shop selling this just 2 streets away from the hotel," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. John nodded, a smile playing on her lips as she settled into the chair beside me. Her gaze drifted to my notebook, where the image of her began to take shape. For a moment, the room fell into silence, the only sound being the soft crackle of the candle and the distant hum of life outside. "Is this her?" Jo finally asked, her voice gentle, filled with curiosity. I nodded, feeling a swell of emotions rise within me. I felt both comforting and painful to share this part of my world. After a stretch of quiet, Jo broke it again, her question hanging heavy in air. "What color were her eyes?" My hands sealed on the paper, the brush suspended in mid-air. Time seemed to slow as I searched my memory, the question reverberating in my mind like an unanswered prayer. I realized I couldn't recall her eyes. They had Faded? I don't know, I replied at last, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. The admission felt like betrayal, a loss I hadn't fully acknowledged until now. I turned my gaze back to the canvas, feeling the weight of my own silence pressing down on me. Cha remained quiet beside me, her presence steady and understanding. The flickering candlelight cast dancing shadows on the walls, illuminating the fragments of my heart that I was slowly beginning to piece together. I was still in the midst of the storm, but perhaps in sharing my memories, I could begin to find my way back to the surface. In the soft glow of the room, I painted, each stroke a testament to the woman who had once filled my life with warmth, and though I couldn't remember the color of her eyes, I could still see her spirit in every brush stroke, every hue that followed across the canvas. I want to know about her, Char replied, her voice soft but intense. I want to know what's so special about this woman, the one who's held onto my friend's mind for so long. She spoke carefully, like someone navigating unfamiliar ground. Shaw had always tried to approach in quiet ways over these last months. She had offered her company without expectation, made space for the silence that often filled the room when words were too heavy to lift. She never asked when she saw I couldn't bear to talk. But now, as her eyes took in the image of my canvas, she seemed to sense that maybe the barrier between us had softened. Maybe this painting was an opening, a way to share what I had never been able to say. She looked at me, hopeful but steady, as if she was willing to wait however long it took. I glanced back at the painting, tracing the lines of her figure with my gaze. This was the closest I'd come to bringing her into the light since she was gone, like I was stitching together fragments of a life I held together in the darkness. This was the woman who had hidden me away from the eyes of the devil, who had given me a place in her home and risked everything for it. She'd been my refuge in the tiny basement, an island of warmth in the cold expanse of fear that stretched across my life. She was... The words caught in my throat. I tried to gather my thoughts, but they felt scattered, like smoke drifting away before I could grasp them. How could I begin to explain her? She was too many things to be put into words, too many for a single conversation to contain. She gave me a chance to survive, I said slowly, feeling the truth of it sink in as I spoke. She was my literature teacher. She was a Jew, I murmured, barely able to voice the words. And my father, my family were Nazis. I kept my gaze fixed on the painting, unable to look at Cha, but even without seeing her face, I felt her shock, the weight of her silence as she absorbed my words. It was a secret I had kept buried, its edges sharp and raw, and now it was out there, lingering in the air between us. Finally, Cha broke its silence, her voice quiet but trembling. You never told me that. I swallowed hard, feeling the old familiar ache in my chest. We were supposed to come to Switzerland together. My voice was strained, brittle, each word pulling me deeper into the memory. And do you remember I told you about the man who killed her? Jo nodded, her eyes wide, her expression both understanding and afraid. Yes? It was my father. She fell silent, the room thick with unspoken thoughts. I felt her processing these, her mind working to feed these pieces together, the pieces of me I'd never revealed. Finally her voice came, hesitant as though she already knew but needed me to say it. And you killed him? There was no judgment in her question, only need to understand, to confirm the truth that she had probably suspected. My heart pounded in my chest as I whispered the truth, my voice barely a murmur, as though saying it any louder would shatter me completely. Yes. The single word hung in the air, a confession that felt like the closing of a wound and the opening of another. I waited for Charles' response, afraid of what she might say. Charles' gaze stayed on me, steady and unwavering. She seemed to search my face, as though looking for the words hidden beneath my silence. What's bothering you so much about her passing, Hilda? She asked softly. The question made something in me stir, and for a moment I didn't know how to answer. I let my eyes drift back to the painting, tracing each line and shade that tried so inadequately to capture her presence. Then the words came low and fragile, as if they'd been buried too deep to fully rise. She didn't deserve to go. Chow listened quietly, giving me the space to say the things that had been left unsaid for so long. The things that had haunted me, lingering like shadows I couldn't shake. I swallowed, the ache of it sharp in my chest, but I couldn't stop now. I'm so weak without her, I whispered, my voice breaking. Chow's reply was immediate, gentle but resolute. I don't think you are. Her words caught me off guard. She said it with such certainty, as though she believed it more than I ever could. But I shook my head, struggling against the weight of my own doubts. I'm stuck there, in that forest, I said, the memory flashing behind my eyes like a nightmare I couldn't wake from. I left her body, do you know what that means? Chaw's expression softened, her brows knitting together in a quiet empathy that both comforted and unsettled me. What other choice did you have, Hilda? She asked, her tone gentle, her voice barely above a whisper. I looked away, feeling that familiar surge of guilt rise up, choking me. I don't know, I murmured, the words falling like a confession. I wish you knew how I see her, I confessed. Jo's question hovered between us, carrying a weight that pressed down on my chest. What do you think she thinks about you? How does she see you? Her voice was gentle but insistent, urging me to look beyond my pain, beyond the grief that had consumed me since I had left her behind. I opened my mouth to answer but stopped. The words felt impossible to find, trapped somewhere between guilt and sorrow. My gaze fell to the painting, lingering over every stroke, every detail that could never capture her as she was. She, who had given everything without asking anything in return. Chaw's eyes softened as she watched me struggle. You always talk about, I feel this, I feel that. I want you to think about it, Hilda. She left everything behind for you. She risked her life to protect you, to help you escape to Switzerland. Ask yourself, what do you think she thinks about you? My throat tightened. Memories of the basement, the darkness, the muffled sounds of footsteps above. All those moments when she had stood between me and danger, offering her quiet strength as a shield. I felt as though I'd never be able to repay her, to express what it had meant, what she had meant. Jaw seemed to sense the deep of my silence, and after a pause, she continued, her voice slipping into a tone I'd never heard before. 5 years ago, she began, I was 6 months pregnant with my child. Her gaze softened, a flicker of sadness passing through her eyes. I lost her, and no one remembers her now, not a soul. I felt a pang of empathy, a quiet understanding of loss that reached across the unspoken space between us. Chaw's eyes grew distant, as if seeing something beyond the room, beyond time itself. But if you go into my old home, the one that Nazis took me and Roberts from, you will still find the things I wrote for her, my love for her, left behind in pages, letters, memories. Her words settled over me, heavy and haunting. I watched her, feeling both the insanity of her pain and the strength that carried her through it. There was a resolve in her that I hadn't fully seen before, a determination that even loss couldn't erase. It was like she was giving me a piece of herself, something to hold on to in the emptiness. Chaw's voice softened as she looked at me, her expression both kind and firm. Go back home, Hilda, as soon as it's safe, when all of this is over. The war won't last forever, not for decades or a lifetime. Go back to her home, your home, whatever it's meant to be, and when you're there, you'll find something. I'm certain you'll find it. Her words wove through me like a thread, sewing together pieces I thought were lost. Chaw's gaze softened as she continued, her voice deepening into an almost whisper, like she was revealing a secret she'd held close for too long. If you ask me, you're confused, she said, confused about what you two meant to each other. I felt a lump in my throat, the ache of that unspoken question that had haunted me. Charles seemed to understand that, to see right through the things I was afraid to face. But I'll tell you this, she went on, her eyes steady grounding me. You two were home. Home. She had been my home, and I hers. There, in shadows of the basement, in the silent hours we spent listening for footsteps, in the quiet looks we shared when words felt too dangerous, she had been my shelter, my place to return to, even as the world crumbled around us. You may not have realized it then, she said, but you were each other's strength, each other's refuge, and that doesn't go away. It stays with you, even now. I looked down at the half-finished painting, at the lines that barely captured her likeness, but maybe they didn't need to. Maybe it wasn't about recreating her face or her features. It was about honoring that feeling, that sense of home she had given me. Charles' voice softened again. Whatever you think you lost is still there, Hilda, even if you do not feel it, even if it's buried in a place you can't reach right now. The room felt quieter, fuller, her voice lingering like a promise. The rain fell hard that night, relentless against the window, each drop like a reminder. It was always the rain that haunted me, that seemed to carry the weight everything I tried so hard to bury. The rain was always to blame. I sat there, still listening to its steady rhythm, and I thought of her, of what Shaw had said. Her words had dug deep, stirring something inside me I'd locked away. And now, with the rain pounding and shadows thick around me, I felt her absence like an ache, a hollow space in my chest that no words could fill. I pressed a hand to my collarbone, feeling the thin metal chain, her necklace, cool against my skin. It had always been there, a fragile link to the past, as if wearing it kept her closer. It was probably the wrong metal for me. It left my skin raw, an angry red whenever it shifted, but I couldn't bring myself to take it off. That small sting, that mark on my skin was nothing compared to the pain for cutting her. I would wear it until it wore me down. Just like her memory, like the way her voice faded a little more each day, slipping further away no matter how hard I tried to hold on to it. That quiet, steady voice I could barely hear now. My mind grasped at the memories, replaying fragments, desperate not to lose the sound of her, the weight she'd once filled every empty space inside me. Thinking of her hurt, it was a wound that never healed, always raw and open, and yet I knew I'd never stop. I'd let her memory settle deep, let it wear away at me like the metal against my skin. Maybe one day it would break me completely, but I didn't care. She was worth that. Her memory was worth that. The rain kept falling, drowning the world outside as if it could wash away everything, but there was no rain strong enough to wash her away from me. What else could I do? This was all I had left, this small, worn necklace that felt too fragile, as if it might snap at any moment and take her memory with it. I only had this, just a touch of the metal against my skin, a reminder of everything she had been to me. I held on to that, pressing it against my chest until the metal left faint marks on my skin. Each link pressing into me like a brand, a scar I almost wanted. I felt the pendant between my fingers, its edges worn smooth over time, as if I could wear away the pain just by holding on. In that tiny piece of metal, I tried to find her, to feel her, even though I knew I couldn't. I wondered to myself, staring blankly at the rain-streaked window, when will I be able to return to Germany? That word felt strange on my tongue, return, as if the country I left behind might no longer exist, not the way I remembered it, and yet I longed for it, for some piece of familiarity, of home. Home? The word echoed in my mind, hollow and uncertain. Was that place still my home, or had the war taken that too, shredding it beyond recognition? My memories felt like remnants of a dream, frayed and faded around the edges, the people and places blurred by time and distance. Maybe home wasn't even there anymore, just a shell left behind like bones scattered in an empty field. When will the war end? The question sat heavily in my mind, as cold and forgiving as the rain. Would it ever end, or was this my life now, drifting from place to place, a stranger to my own past? Everything ends anyways, just like the war did, though it felt impossible at the time. I remember the day the news arrived, not just as another piece of information, but as a strange, overwhelming weight lifted from the air itself. People had whispered about it for days, passing glances filled with suspicion and hope, wondering if it was yet another rumor of the start of some horrible twist. It was late April 1945, a grey day thick with rain, when I first heard the unbelievable news in the hotel lobby. The radio was on, its crackling voice cutting through the soft murmurs of the guests. "The Führer is dead," it said. Hitler had committed in Berlin, gone from the world he'd thrown into chaos. People stopped in mid-step, like they had heard some ghostly voice out of the shadows, and for a long moment everything was silent except for the hiss and pop of the radio. I barely moved, my heart pounding as though it too couldn't believe the words. They didn't say much at first, only that he'd taken his life and that Berlin was falling. People began whispering, heads turning toward each other, faces stricken with something I couldn't recognize, not relief, not exactly fear, but a strange surreal feeling as though we had all just walked out of a nightmare and were blinking in the lights, not yet certain it was morning. I remember an elderly man near the front desk, his hand shaken as he reached out to steady himself on a table, his eyes glistening as if he wanted to cry but couldn't. He looked at me, his gaze full of disbelief, as if to say, "Is it really over?" And still it wasn't. News of Hitler's death didn't mean peace. It only meant the war was unraveling faster and faster, yet is still tangled and confused. Switzerland was an island of safety, but it couldn't stop the grief and despair that had seeped across every border. For days after, people would speak in hushed voices as though he could somehow hear them from beyond, the words fragile with uncertainty. I don't think any of us fully grasped what it meant. Then, on May 7th, the news came. An armistice officially signed, and the fighting was over. Word spread through this town like fire, igniting a feverish excitement. People spilled into the streets, strangers embracing strangers, laughing and crying in equal measure. They had heard rumors of a ceasefire before, of course, but this was different. This was real. People shouted, "It's over," again and again, like the words were too big for their mouths. I remember standing just outside the hotel, watching the celebrations, not moving, only letting myself breathe and feel the sound of those words ripple through me. Around me, children were playing, oblivious to the weight of the words, and couples clung to each other, faces wet with tears. There were no soldiers here, no flags or praise, but the relief was palpable, as if the mountains themselves sighed, echoing the cries of the people. But for me, it felt strange, hollow almost. I had come here to escape, but now there was nowhere else to run, nowhere else to hide. The war was over, and I was left with only the empty space it left behind. And somewhere in that silence, I thought of her, how she'd talk about this day, back when hope was a thing we had to keep in our pockets, hidden and sacred. She'd said that one day we'd walk freely through these streets again, that everything we had lost would somehow be worth it, that there would be a day of peace that would feel like a sunshine after endless rain. And here it was, the day she dreamed of, but without her, it felt incomplete, a half-formed vision that I couldn't share with her.